Some mornings feel different before you even open your eyes. Your chest feels tight, your breathing shallow, as if your body senses a storm your mind hasn't yet recognized. I woke up like that on the day my life quietly began to unravel. At the time, I ignored the feeling. I wish I hadn't. My name is Louise Miller. I am 73 years old, and for most of my life I carried this story in silence, afraid that speaking it aloud would destroy what little peace I had left. But silence is heavy, and memories grow louder with age. So today, I finally tell the truth. I was born in a small Pennsylvania town in the early 1950s, raised in a simple wooden house my father built with his own hands. We didn't have luxury, but we had stability. My parents believed deeply in one another, sacrificing for one another, and standing together no matter what. I grew up thinking family was the safest place in the world. When I was 17, I met Frank at a church fundraiser. He was shy, awkward, and nervous, holding a cup of apple cider so tightly his hands trembled. His voice was soft, and his smile was uneven, but there was kindness in his eyes that made me feel calm. That kindness stayed with me for the rest of my life. We married young and built a simple life. Frank worked long hours at a factory, often returning home exhausted, but he never forgot to remind me that he loved us. Sometimes it was a flower he picked on the way home. Sometimes it was just a tired smile. To me, it was enough. Our daughter Mary was born, first bright, confident, and curious. Years later came our son Junyu, quieter and more withdrawn, a child who preferred drawing in silence to noise and crowds. We were not rich, but our home was full of routines, shared meals, Sunday church visits, and laughter that came easily. Looking BAFTA, I regret the small complaints I made, the tight budget, the long hours Frank worked, the feeling that life was repeating itself. I didn't understand how fragile happiness could be, because sometimes life doesn't break all at once. Sometimes it cracks slowly, quietly, until one day it collapses without warning. I believed the worst thing that could happen was losing my husband. I had no idea something far more unthinkable was waiting just ahead. The morning started like any other weekday. Frank drank his coffee quickly, kissed my forehead, and told me he would be late because of a meeting at work. I watched him walk out the door without knowing those would be the last words he would ever speak to me. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the phone rang. There is a sound a phone makes when it carries bad news. Even before you hear the voice, your body reacts. My hands began to shake as I answered. The man on the other end spoke calmly, professionally. There had been an accident at the factory. My husband had been taken to the hospital. He did not survive. Don't remember what I said after that. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the wall, listening to the phone emit that hollow, disconnected sound. It felt as if someone had removed a part of my body without warning. At the hospital, they told me Frank hadn't suffered. They said it gently, as if that should bring comfort. I identified his body, brushing my fingers through his hair. Still, carrying the faint scent of the same cream he had used since he was young, I promised him I would take care of our children. That promise would soon become the heaviest burden of my life. Telling Junior was unbearable. He didn't cry like a child. He cried like someone who had lost the ground beneath his feet. Mary came home the next day, her strength barely holding together. The house felt emptier, colder, unfamiliar. The funeral passed in a blur. Neighbors brought food we couldn't eat. People said kind words that meant nothing. They told me God had a plan. I nodded, but I felt nothing except exhaustion. After the burial, I needed a moment alone. I told Mary I was going to the bathroom and walked down the hallway. As I reached the door, I heard voices inside male voices, whispered but deliberate. One of them belonged to my son. Something about his tone made my stomach twist with fear I had never felt before. Before I could react, the door opened, and in that moment, everything I believed about family shattered beyond repair. Standing in that doorway, I learned that grief was only the beginning of my nightmare. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to understand what I was seeing. Juno was there, but he wasn't alone. Several older boys stood beside him, boys Frank had never trusted, boys who carried themselves with a hardness that made me uneasy. My heart raced, but I still wasn't prepared for what followed. I tried to speak. I asked what was going on. My voice trembled, but I expected confusion, maybe embarrassment. What I saw instead was something I had never seen in my son's eyes before: coldness, anger, and something dangerously unfamiliar. He accused me of ruining his father's life. He said I had forced Frank to work until he died. His words were sharp, filled with blame and resentment that stunned me. I tried to explain. I reminded him of our life, our sacrifices, our love. None of it reached him. What happened next is something I carry with me every day. I won't describe every detail, but I will say this: the person who hurt me in that room was no longer the child I raised. It was as if someone else was wearing his face. When it was over, I lay on the cold floor, unable to move, unable to scream. The home I had built with love had become the most dangerous place I had ever known. He left without looking back. Time lost meaning. Pain blurred into silence. Then came the number that crushed me. 20 camels, he exclaimed, were worth roughly $15,000, the exact amount I had spent on this entire trip. 2 years of sacrifice, budgeting, planning, reduced to a price placed on my existence. More men appeared nearby, not threatening, just watching, waiting. The restaurant manager grew nervous and called the police. I stood there frozen while men discussed my worth and my fate. And my husband, the man who was supposed to protect me, could barely look at me. In that moment, I understood something painful. Intent didn't matter anymore. Impact did. When the police arrived, I realized this situation was about to get much worse. We were escorted through the Grand Bazaar like criminals. Sirens, stares, phones recording. At the police station, everything felt cold and unfamiliar. Hard chairs, bright lights, long waits. We were separated and questioned individually through translators. When it was my turn, I explained everything. The trip, the restaurant, the joke, the fear. Yes, I said, my voice shaking. He said 30 camels. The officer nodded and wrote it down. That detail mattered. After hours, we were told this wasn't criminal, it was civil. One could force a sale, but the men could pursue compensation for dishonor and breach of verbal agreement. We were told to visit the American consulate the next morning. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment. Marcus laughed out because once trust breaks publicly, it doesn't quietly repair itself. The consulate explained the truth, and it was terrifying. The consular officer listened carefully. Then she said something I wasn't prepared for. This is a known scam. But the relief didn't last. She explained how these situations trap tourists, civil claims, passport holds, lengthy legal battles, cultural pressure. Then Hassan arrived with his lawyer. They weren't asking for camels, they asked for compensation. $25,000. Marcus nearly collapsed. Negotiations followed. Hours of tense discussion. Finally, the number dropped. $8,000. The price of a careless mouth. Even after we paid, nothing felt resolved. But the money was transferred. The men left satisfied. Just like that, no apology. No acknowledgement of harm. The rest of the trip felt empty. The city lost its beauty. Laughter felt forced. Marcus apologized repeatedly. But apologies don't erase humiliation. They don't undo fear. And they don't restore dignity. When we returned home, I had to decide what kind of future I wanted. We stayed married, but nothing returned to how it was. Trust, once cracked, never looks the same. Marcus learned restraint. I learned self-worth, and I learned this. A joke that costs your partner dignity is not humor. It's betrayal, and words spoken can cost far more than money. Because the real price wasn't camel sit, was the illusion of safety I once had.